Hi, Matt Alt here. I first became interested in Japan because I loved toys. I still love Japanese toys. I'm here in my collection at my house. I still collect Japanese toys today. And as you know, I also write about them. My book, Pure Invention, actually starts with a toy. And the reason that I'm talking to you about this today is because August 15th is known as VJ Day in the West, the Victory over Japan Day. It's the end of World War II. And World War II came to a close, of course, because of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there were a great many conventional bombings before that, and perhaps the biggest, and undoubtedly the most devastating in Japan, even more so than the nuclear bombings, was known as Operation Meeting House. It was conducted in early March of 1945 when the Americans had secured the total control of the airspace over Japan and could begin flying B-29 bombers over Japanese cities uncontested. The first city they chose was Tokyo. And the first area in Tokyo they chose to bomb was around Asakusa. Now, Asakusa today is a bustling tourist area. It's known for Sensoji Temple. There's a lot of shops around there. But for a very long time, and even today, it's also the center of Japan's toy industry. Today, companies like Bandai have their headquarters there. Right across the river in Sumidagawa, right across the Sumidagawa River, you can find companies like Tomy. And there's tons of little workshops, warehouses doing wholesale. And in times of old, there were even a lot of little factories there producing toys for various companies. Now you might ask yourself, why would the American military target this area first in their major bombing raids of Tokyo and of Japan? And the answer is very simple. The same technologies that went into making precision toys in the pre-war era were just as easily repurposed into producing war materiel. And those little neighborhood factories turned into factories producing parts, components. They weren't weapons factories, but they were making components for the Japanese war machine. And American military planners were well aware of this, and they specifically targeted this area because of it. So the toy center of Tokyo was one of the first to feel the brunt of this attack, and it was a brutal attack. Operation Meeting House sent almost 300 B-29s into the sky over Tokyo. They unleashed phosphorus and napalm on the city below in the early morning hours, specifically concocted with the aim of triggering a firestorm in the streets below because they knew that Japan of the era was mainly wood and paper. And it worked. It was a horrific apocalyptic conflagration on the ground. 100,000 Japanese lost their lives in Tokyo that day. 1 million more were displaced. And according to one report that I read, the pilots flying above had to close their windows because the smell of burning flesh was so strong that it nauseated them, even miles above the city. So this is a very brutal, sad moment in U.S.-Japan relations. But the reason I bring it up is because immediately after war's end, the first industry to restart in Japan was the toy industry. And specifically, Japan's toy makers began making portrayals of American military vehicles. Part of this was because they knew that these vehicles would appeal to the soldiers who were occupying Japan at the time, and they also had an eye on foreign markets where these objects, these jeeps, these planes, weren't seen as symbols of terror as they were to the Japanese. They were seen as symbols of victory. My book opens up with a man named Kosuge who made a tin jeep out of metal that he reclaimed from American military camps that had sprung up around then. And you can actually maybe see here that this is actually cut from a can. This isn't one of Kosuge's jeeps, but it is one of many that were made around that same time period. And toys like this proved incredibly popular, not only among Americans, but among Japanese, who it seemed it really appealed to them to be able to shrink down these things that had terrified them into a more palm size. It's almost as though they were taming their nightmares by naming them, by giving them shape and form. And the first way to give them shape and form was as toys. So this Jeep kickstarted the Japanese toy industry, which was the first industry to restart in Japan, and the first industry that American occupation forces allowed Japanese to begin exporting abroad. So in a very real way, toys jump-started the entire Japanese economy after World War II. By the 1950s, Japan had recovered a lot from its devastation during World War II. And that's when a man named Eiichiro Tomizawa, who was a tin toy maker just like Kosuge, who made the Jeeps, decided that he wanted to produce a high-quality replica of the B-29, the very same aircraft that had been bombing the neighborhood just 6-7 years earlier. On the surface, it sounds crazy, and Tomizawa encountered a lot, and I mean a lot, of resistance from fellow toy makers and people working in the industry, because to them, this was a terrifying, terrifying sort of vehicle, and it had caused so much death and destruction. But Tomizawa felt that by making a model of it, that he would be able to appeal to Western toy buyers and to Western children. And so he convinced his co-workers to help him in this quixotic quest to make a toy of the very same weapon that had terrorized Japan only a few years earlier. It went on to sell like wildfire. It was priced, it was very, very detailed. And the reason for this is because it was going to be priced for a luxury sort of toy item. 500 yen. This is in an era when a bowl of not instant, but noodles that you'd buy at a stall or something cost 15 yen. So 500 yen was a huge amount of money. But Tomizawa was smart. He was making this stuff mainly for export. But even at this price point, the B-29s flew off the shelves, no pun intended. And when they got to America, they caused a sensation. It was a huge success at the toy fairs of 1952 and 1953. And Tomizawa went on to sell thousands upon thousands of these things. He had to scale up his operation. He had locals helping him in almost like a barn. It's like a barn-like factory that was erected over the river, not in Asakusa, but over on the other side of the river in Sumida Ward, very near where Takara is located today. And that's important. We'll get to that in a moment. So these B-29s were another way that Japan filled its coffers and that it supported itself in those really dark, devastating post-war years. I bring this up because I actually have one of those B-29 toys. I purchased it when I was writing Pure Invention, and this is it. It's an amazing, amazing piece of work. It's quite large, as you can see, and I'm going to have to take some insert shots of this later. But it's detailed. It has a landing gear. It has the rotating propellers. It's friction powered, so if you kind of race it along a tabletop, it'll roll on its own. You can see it's labeled United States Air Force. And it's a very high quality portrayal of this vehicle. When I bought this, I had a lot of mixed feelings about it because it's really a confluence of plaything and politics and war and all sorts of things that we don't really associate with toys. But as the famous designer, mid-century modern designer, Charles Eames once said, toys aren't as innocent as they look. Toys are the prelude to serious ideas. And this B-29 is one of those sorts of toys that's a prelude to serious ideas. It really makes you think about, war and recovery, the damage that we did to each other, and the friendship that Japan and America enjoy today. My own grandfather fought in World War II. He was on a battleship in the Pacific. And to him, of course, the Japanese were enemies when he was fighting the war. But afterwards, when he came back, and I remember this when I was a kid, and I first started to show interest in Japan, I was really worried that he would be upset. But as it turned out, he was one of my biggest supporters in my interest in learning Japanese. And when the time came that my school offered a homestay program abroad for like a couple of weeks in Japan during, was it spring break or summer break, something like that, my grandfather is the one who actually put forth the money. He said, you should go, you should learn from them. And this was in the midst of a lot of really heated rhetoric about the Japanese in the 1980s. They were seen as economic rivals back then. So having his support was really a boost to me, a kind of a wind under my wings, so to speak. And I still think about it a lot today. But, you know, I live here in Japan now. I live here not too far away from Asakusa, where this terrible, you know, kind of crescendo of the war, one of the early crescendos of the war happened. And today marks 79 years exactly since that war ended. And so much has changed since then, of course. You know, Japan and America are friends, allies. I mean, it's a place where many young Americans want to go to visit, at least. Japanese pop culture is hugely popular in my country and all over the world. And I can't help but think that toys played a huge role in that. As for Eiichiro Tomizawa, he went on to found a company known as Tomy, which became one of Japan's biggest toy companies. And then, more recently, much after he passed away, it merged with Takara, which is now known as Takara Tomy Toys. And Takara is, of course, the company that brought the world to Transformers. It was a transformative series that really profoundly affected me as a kid. And so it's really interesting, this cycle of war into play, into changing people's minds. Anyway, that's why the Eiichiro Tomizawa B29 toy is so important to me. Not just because it helped resurrect the Japanese economy and Japan as a whole, but because I think it speaks to the importance of toys in all of our lives. Not just the children who are supposed to be playing with them, and the adults who sometimes enjoy them just as much, if not more, but for the world. And I know this sounds like a kind of dreamy, pie in the sky kind of thing, but it means a lot to me. And I thought August 15th, the end of World War II between America and Japan, would be a great time to talk about that. So thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. As always, I am greatly appreciative of your watching this, and I hope to be back at you with more videos in the very near future. Talk to you then.